Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a class from our 2022 Elul Learning Series.
When Rabbi Schatz, my good friend, checked in with me and said, would you do a Back to the Basics class, I offered a few ideas, and I think Ari, who I hadn't met yet, said, well, we need an Israel sounds good, which is funny. I saw there was like a Back to the Basics being offered on being a gabbai or Torah, Haftorah reading, or skills that, frankly, people can be a really involved synagogue Jew, even at a place like TBA where, I don't know, we have a really large cadre of super educated Jews and still might not have picked up on the skills to be whatever it is, Haftorah reading or being a gabbai. And in an hour can walk away with some really, really useful nuts and bolts skills. And we have tons of wonderful Beth Am folks who can teach that. Israel is, I think, the opposite end of the spectrum. I would be pretty darn skeptical about the idea that there's anyone in the Beth Am family who doesn't have a really strong Israel story. So what does it mean to go back to the basics? I think it's exactly that. It's going back and re-examining a story that we probably know very, very well, and maybe thinking about the story differently, reopening that story, and looking at it in a new way. So to prompt this, and I see we only have 2 volunteers to choose from, so maybe we'll get a volunteer. And if not, I'll voluntold myself. But I'll Tybal, I'll call on you in 1 second. But what I'm looking for is to start with is whether either of you has a story that's really, take a step back from Israel, a story of your family, who you are, where you've come from, that you told yourself and kind of knew so well that you could tell it. If somebody roused you at 3 a.m. and asked you to tell that story, you would be able to tell it perfectly. And then something happened where you saw a new angle on that story, and boom, it shook you up, right? It had you rethinking the way you wanted to tell that story because you're now seeing it from another angle. I'm kind of feeling kind of William Faulkner-esque, right? We Sound and the Fury, the same, they get the story told by different folks, and you get a different perspective by hearing the story through different eyes. So if either Tybal or Jackie is able to maybe share an account like that, or Ari, frankly, you're welcome to do so. Any story about yourself, about your family, about your hometown that you learned a different way of telling it, I'd be curious to hear that. And if not, I'll try to play that out. And Tybal, I see you're unmuting, so go for it.
Right. Well, because as I often say, I'm a firstborn from 2 youngest. So when a teacher asks for something, I'm like, I have to jump. And also what you've asked is a very dangerous thing to ask a genealogist.
Great. Love it.
But how dark do you want to go?
You're my volunteer, so you can go the direction it feels right to go.
Yeah, and what if I bore Ari? Because I think he's heard this before.
I'll never be bored of any of your stories.
Oh, because this just came up yesterday where I was trying to explain something to someone. And it's not that my frame changed, but I now have a different frame. So okay. I'll do it this way. I'm from a part of Pittsburgh that did not have Jews or blacks or you name it growing up. I had a class of over 900 and there were 5 Jews.
Wow.
So we were really visible. 5 Jews, 2 blacks. They were visible too. And to Jews in a certain way, and I should say, and most of them were the kind of descended from Eastern European Roman Catholics who really did think Jews had horns. Okay.
Wow.
So, and I still remember once being at a kiddush at a local Bethesda conservative shul, meeting somebody from the Jewish part of Pittsburgh. And I remember saying to her, this was supposed to be a rational person, Oh, where are you from? I said, I'm not from the Jewish part. Oh, where are you from? And then I said, Whitehall. And she looked at me and said, but no Jews live there. And I thought, idiot. Sorry. I just told you that it was going to be unexpected. Anyway, so, but it just so happens, and in my school system, public school all the way, 13 years with kindergarten, there really was institutionalized anti-Semitism. I'll just leave it there. And what came as no surprise to me, the massacre shooter was from my neighborhood, dropped out of my school system. So it's a different, but it didn't take me by surprise. As I said, I actually knew enough to know the funeral home that everybody uses in Pittsburgh, the Jewish one. I started looking at that to see the names of the victims before they were publicly released, all those things. And before the shooter was identified, I was like, there was only one mystery, which I won't take the time with, is why he picked Squirrel Hill and not Mount Lebanon, but I eventually figured that out, why he did that. Oh, and the short answer is security. Mount Lebanon synagogues, which are closer and more visible, had already had security because of an attempt, and the Squirrel Hill synagogue did not. But it's now when I say what I say, the people who truly didn't understand what it was like to grow up in a very different America Jewishly, just for you, Rabbi Ephraim, when I moved down here and I started teaching at a place called Jewish Study Center on the Metro, I would never say the word Jewish because that's my Pittsburgh background. I'm trapped on the Metro. There could be an anti-Semite here. This was ordinary life for me in America from childhood. And I'll just say the reframing is because now people get it when I can do the tagline, the neighborhood and the school system that produced the massacre shooter. And the American jurisprudence, because people are still waiting, and the victims and survivors and family members still haven't had to testify yet. And that to me is torture upon torture. Thank you, America. Okay, I'm done.
So Tybal shared, I think there are a bunch of ways your story actually is useful as a paradigm for this idea of we know a story and we retell a story, and we see different angles on the story. So you offer, I think most American Jews look at the story of the awful shooting in the synagogue in Pittsburgh and wonder how that could come out of a part of Pittsburgh. And you tell a story, wait a minute, I knew a different piece of Pittsburgh where there really was terrific anti-Semitism and folks who grew up in the very Jewish neighborhoods were shocked by it. So you've offered them another narrative. I think you probably, there's just simply the narrative of, I know Pittsburgh. Here's different angles of Pittsburgh. There's folks who say, who have the story of no Jews live in that neighborhood, and you have them rewrite the narrative. Wait, there are Jews who live in that neighborhood. Even simply rewriting this narrative of what is America. Somebody who lives in one place hears one story of what is America, and somebody who lives in another place has another story of this is America. You have the story of I would never get on the DC Metro and talk with a friend I'm with to say I'm going to teach at a Jewish studies class, and others would be shocked by that because they ride from the Silver Spring stop to the Union Station stop and sit with a friend talking about the Parsha every Wednesday morning, and they don't even have a moment of pause. So your story of America is very different from their story of America. I think that's dark, but it's actually a perfect illustration of what what I wanted to share, which is how we tell a story for years sits in us very, very deeply, and then we might see it through another person's eyes, and the story is shifted radically. And I think, one of the places and now I'm hesitant to use it because your American Jewish story, Tybal, is so different than mine. I would say, though, for most American Jews I've encountered, I'll at least still try to stay with most. We have an Israel narrative, right? If someone asked us to tell the story of the state of Israel in 3 minutes, we might start with Dreyfus Affair, right? This idea of very clear moment of institutionalized anti-Semitism in Western Enlightened Europe, Herzl, eventually the first Zionist Congress, this push for a return by Western European Jews to Ottoman Palestine, World War I, the Balfour Declaration, these kind of series of aliyot of Western European Jews, the tragedies and the catastrophe of the Shoah, and eventually the UN vote in Chavtet of November, so the 29th of November of 47, probably that street Chavtet November, not far, I'm guessing, from where Jackie is living in Jerusalem, partition and the beginning of a Jewish state. That's kind of, I don't know, did I do it in 3 minutes? But that's roughly the American, and mainstream way we tell the story of Israel. And to me, I wanted to kind of show artifacts that are like perfect visions of this. Ari, if you can share kind of my image one, which for me is like, I don't know, I can't think of a better image that tells that American Jewish story. It's not up on my screen yet, so I'm going to continue to ramble. But there we go. So we've got Paul Newman as Ari Ben Canaan, Eve Marie Saint as, Kitty Fremont, am I right? I think so. But got this gorgeous Hollywood retelling of that story. I mean, can you beat Paul Newman as like founding Ashkenazi Jew of the state? And like that kind of perfect story of the founding of the state of Israel through the eyes of Western European Ashkenazi narrative into the kind of pre-Labor Party story is the story. Ari, you can take it down. That to me is like story A. And it's not everyone's story, right? It isn't the only story of the founding of the state of Israel. I think what I wanted to do is offer kind of two other Israel stories that will complicate things. Just like Tybel's story, they may make the story more painful for us, but I hope that by re-examining this story of whatever, should we call it our second home, it'll not only shake us up, it'll not only complicate the story, but it'll give us a better understanding of the modern state of Israel, and also maybe perhaps this Elul time we're like looking to make things better, right? It'll help us focus in on making a better Israel for tomorrow. So I'm going to offer two. There could be 2 bazillion, but I'm going to offer 2 other windows into other Israel stories. So, and feel free to stop me. I see a message. Oh, cool. So I see Tybel is saying she has a first cousin who lives on Chavtet in November Street. So that's a nice street that runs through West Jerusalem. Chavtet in November, for those who will catch this via a later podcast, is simply the Hebrew for the 29th of November. And that was the day in late 1947 where the UN took that vote of partition. There are great photos. Had I put together more images, but you can Google it and find it in 2 minutes, of the streets of Tel Aviv as folks are listening on their radios to the UN vote that'll declare whether to partition Palestine and create a Jewish state. Okay, so complication A. We've told the story. I think we typically tell the story of the founding of the state of Israel through the eyes of Ashkenazi Jewry, those who came especially from the West, kind of the Paul Newman-y looking people, kind of the fact that we use Dreyfus in France as such an important moment, in Herzl, and the story of kind of the relationship with the British, is very much a Western European story. And then it becomes more Eastern European as kind of the aliyot come from the Russian Empire and then from the Soviet Union and from the Eastern European countries. But the story of the state of Israel is also very much a Mizrachi story. So Jews from North Africa, from the Middle East, who come in later immigrations. Not to say that there aren't folks from Middle Eastern countries who are coming not only during the Zionist period, but before the kind of modern Zionism gets going in the late 19th century and during. But there are these mass immigrations of hundreds of thousands of folks who come after the forming of the state for a multiplicity of reasons, both efforts by the state to bring them in and rising anti-Semitism and violence against them in the countries they live in after the forming of the state. And they arrive and they face discrimination. They are often the last on the line to get an apartment. They come with very little and they get sent right to ma'abarot, tent villages. When they are finally offered kind of permanent housing, they're often not offered the apartment in an area of the country with a lot of economic opportunity, but they're offered housing in what's known as the periphery. So outside of, we talk about this in the U.S. We know this well, right? We talk about the Acela corridor between D.C. and Boston, where there's tremendous kind of an economic engine of the country, the West Coast, and kind of almost one mega center from the Bay Area down to San Diego with, again, lots of economic opportunity. And then other parts of the country that have a lot less economic opportunity. Those peripheral places are often where those Mizrachim end up, those Jews from the Middle East. First in the Ma'abarot, they then, once they end up there, they're not getting the good jobs. Those good jobs are going, even if they do make it to a city, they are the folks who are Ashkenazi immigrants who had gotten to the country first, who've joined the Labor Party, who have connections with the labor unions, get the good jobs. And there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of frustration. And they face, discrimination and sometimes violence from police. And the famous marker of what happens is essentially that these folks turn against the Labor Party, the party of Ben Gurion and all of the kind of founding fathers and mothers, because we'll include Golda in that story, of the state of Israel. They end up connecting with the precursors to the Likud party, and there's this mahapach, this grand reversal in the 77 election, where finally, for the first time, the Labor Party and the predecessors to the Labor Party are not able to don't get a majority and are finally tossed out of power. But I'd like to turn to another kind of image. I'll ask Ari, are you on this call now? He's here. So if you could bring up image 2. If you can, is there a way, if you can make it a little bigger, if possible? If not, I'll read from it a little bit. But this is folks know that's fine. Folks know, or inside folks tend to know, at least moderately inside folks tend to know. And I'll stop for any questions Jackie or Tybal might have in a minute. But folks know the story of the Mahapach, that famous 1977 Knesset election, where for the first time the center-left parties don't win the election. They know that story from 77, but really it's during those interwar years between 1967 and 73 that there's this first effort to kind of stand up to the Ashkenazi establishment. And hearing about the rise of the Black Panthers here in the U.S., a group of Mizrachim in Jerusalem, in kind of peripheral neighborhoods within Jerusalem that aren't getting a lot of goods and services, found their own Black Panther party, the Israeli Black Panthers, to kind of stand up to say, we're not getting milk deliveries in this neighborhood. You're not putting heat in our buildings. You're not ensuring that our kids have frankly, kindergartens that they can go to. You're just not investing in our neighborhoods, and it's enough of it. We're fed up. We deserve equal treatment. And they organize to kind of protest. They protest in front of the mayor of Jerusalem, the famous Teddy Kollek's office, who tosses them off his lawn. They protest in front of the Kotel. They end up meeting with Golda. They start organizing to steal the milk deliveries that are delivered to the rich neighborhoods and to redistribute them in their neighborhoods at the crack of dawn. They organize their own kindergartens that kind of embarrass the state that it can't do that. But the one artifact that they created, which I think is just phenomenal and which was lost and rediscovered in the last half decade, is in that in those first months of this protest movement, it comes upon Passover time, and they decide to create their own Seder to mark this moment. Kind of a perfect moment. It's a moment used by Jews and Christians and frankly anyone who knows of the Pesach story, and to say we want freedom, we want liberation, and they write their own Haggadah. They're quite learned Jews, and they put together their own Haggadah that they read at their own Pesach Seder, and they thought that for years since 71 they thought that all of these Haggadot were lost until in 2017, I don't know. At some point, Jackie, you should look him up. But the big Reform synagogue in Tel Aviv called Beit Daniel, the rabbi there, the senior rabbi there is Rabbi Meir Azari. Maybe at some point Jackie will end up there, or another Beth Amer who listens to this on podcast will end up there. In any event, Rabbi Meir Azari is a collector of Haggadot, and somehow he got his hands on a mimeograph 1971 copy of this Haggadah, and tracked down one of the living members of this group and said, "Would you be interested in this?" And he was just delighted to find it. Contacted a group of folks. New Israel Fund, where I work, is a part of the group that helped kind of republish this, retranslate this artifact, and make it available to tell this story of this really, really important stage in this struggle to look for equality, look for justice, look for equal rights for Mizrachi immigrants. And hold on, let's see if I can play with my screen without totally falling apart here. I warned Ari that I do these on too small a screen, and then when I need too much. Okay, so I'll just read a little clip from it. So I brought up the Manishtana page, and they start with Ach Manishtana halayla hazeh mikol halaylot. So what's the difference, as you know, between this night and every other night? Shebachol halaylot anu ochlim bekoshi lechem umayim v'halayla hazeh eina anu ochlim afilu matzah umayim. They say on other nights it's with difficulty that we're able to get just bread and water to eat, and tonight we don't even have enough to afford matzah and water. Shebachol haleilot anu ochlim rak yirakot. On other nights, kind of playing with the idea that we eat vegetables on other nights. They're saying we can't afford meat. On other nights, we eat only vegetables. V'halayla hazeh hamemshala machshiva otanu levehemot. So they rhyme on yirakot and say on this night, the government is treating us like animals. Shebachol haleilot anu kulanu mikur roadim. All other nights were kind of shivering from cold because their buildings weren't provided with enough heat. V'halayla hazeh rov rubenu atzuvim. And tonight we're terribly sad and heartbroken. So I'll pause. That just gives you. This is Tybal told us that she was sharing quite a dark story. Frankly, the Israeli Black Panthers Haggadah is equally, I would say, a dark story. These are not folks who are feeling particularly empathetic to the government. They're not feeling particularly open to kind of speaking with light or kind tongues. They're feeling really, really angry, really, really disappointed, really upset, and they're tired of kind of asking nicely. I can share with this group afterwards in an email, or if Ari maybe can help me. I can share a video of a 12-minute tour that Reuven Abergel, who is one of the handful of kind of leaders, the kind of primary author of this Haggadah, took of his neighborhood and kind of telling the story of writing this Haggadah. But you see deep anger, deep frustration, and I think hopefully this is a very different Israel story than we know, and it maybe asks us to engage with Israel a little differently. I'll pause in case anyone has a question here. Tybal, I see your hand is up.
Yes, it's not a question, but if it's okay, I have two comments.
Yeah. Gesundheit.
And in part because the way I grew up, where you're always have to be careful about anti-Semitism, I'll even say one of my uncles, who was a Judaic historian and librarian, wrote a monograph on blood libels in the United States, which all of a sudden, alas, he's been dead for many years, but all of a sudden his monograph is living on. But one of your wording, I just wanted to get you to clarify that despite all these waves of immigration, there were Jews that had not really left the land.
Of course.
But just some of the wording when you were saying the Ashkenazim came in, but there really were Jews, and even, as of course you would know, great Jewish philanthropists buying land during the Ottoman rule, mandatory Palestine, so the poor Jews could continue to live where they live. That's one. And the other is that I guess sometimes I get troubled by analogies with the United States because, and maybe at least this is how it feels to me. I'll tell you about the analogy because I think it's very important to remember context and not look at things historically, anachronistically. And what I mean by that is when the United States started its independence and the whole thing you were discussing about the Northeast Corridor, going back in many ways to colonial times, Route 1, whatever, the America's economic engine at the time of independence, yes, absolutely slavery in the South, but all sorts of other things. It was a very different engine than Israel, who had to take weapons that basically didn't work and give them to people who hadn't recovered from being in killing camps to try to defend Israel. So, and by the way, I have seen more than once this particular Haggadah. I also collect Haggadahs. I know this Haggadah. So I'm not saying that these weren't wrongs that absolutely have to be righted. But what I am saying is that the leadership at the time of Israeli independence, both economically and in terms of material, had to make all sorts of decisions that then became institutionalized that weren't necessarily the decisions they might have wanted to make idealistically. Idealistically, let me go back to, I'm not going to get into Mizrachi and Yemenites and whatever. Let me just do it with that poor Shoah survivor who's stepping off the ship. In a better world, the new country would have said, you will never have to fight. You can go here and recover. And instead, many of them fought. Their names were never known, whatever. I'm just saying that sometimes decisions get made that are made in the heat of the moment, and then they become institutionalized and then part of the infrastructure, and they're harder to undo. So comparing certain things, Israel to America, I don't think is a fair comparison, because America, the enemies had to sail here. You know, England, Great Britain had to sail here to get here. There was a different economic engine, and now I'm done.
Oop, I accidentally muted instead of unmuted. Okay, I'm back. Fair enough, Tybal. So I'm just going to address quickly your 2 points. The first is just to say, I hope I wasn't clear. I wasn't confusing. Absolutely. There's always been a Jewish presence in the land of Israel. I would, obviously it's very small and very poor. And I think I tried to stress that, especially vis-a-vis Mizrachim, in the sense that when they were coming in those pre-state years, they very much weren't a part of this like narrative and move that we were kind of talking about, which was this political Zionism kind of inspired by 19th century European nationalism. They were coming as religious pilgrims. And that's what there was. There was this small community in Jerusalem. There was this small community in Tzvat. There was absolutely. So I'll just reiterate what you said. I don't know to the other part, the comparisons piece. I both hear that comparisons can be sloppy and can be confusing, but I also think they can be clarifying. And I think we understand things by seeing them through the filters and stories we already have. And I think, frankly, especially here, where these young Mizrachi, most of them kind of born abroad and came as small kids, but some of them native born, who kind of founded the Israeli Black Panthers, the Pantarim Hashchorim. They were doing exactly what we're saying might be difficult, which is they were deft consumers of post-war culture, where America is already the dominant cultural presence, and they're watching stories from the United States of the struggle of African Americans here in the U.S. For more rights, for better distribution of resources. They're seeing this story of folks who live in kind of who didn't get access to the benefits kind of post World War II that white Americans got access to. It's all the stories we know. And they're saying, wait a minute, something about that story resonates with me. And therefore they're deliberately using this image of the Black Panther. And they're saying, this is my story too. And then what I think is, frankly, as a rabbi is so awesome, and hopefully as other educated Jewish consumers of this story is really cool, is they're taking a story that's not their story but that resonates with them and using images from it. And then they're reaching deep into the Jewish canon, and they're really knowledgeable Jews. They're taking the Haggadah and they're playing with that story and using it to say, hey, government, we want to be treated better, and we're going to use this story in such a way to say that you're treating us like not like we're Jews coming home to Israel, but like you're our Egyptian taskmasters. It hurts. It hurts to hear the story told that way. We don't want to hear people calling the government of the state of Israel, especially Jews, saying the government of the state of Israel is treating us like Egyptian taskmasters. But that's exactly what they're doing. So it's not for me to say they can't do that. I shouldn't be using this analogy. They used it. It's their they seized it themselves and decided to use it. Tybo, if it's a short question, why don't you jump in? And
yeah,
then
I wasn't talking about their use of the Black Panther imagery. I was talking that I don't think is a historic whatever. I was talking about comparing the founding years.
No. So what I was trying to use the different I was just trying to use the image of. I'm sorry if that was confusing. I was trying to use the image of there are I was just trying to explain this idea of periphery and center and economic opportunity, and just simply to say if you were plopped down today in the Acela corridor, it might be easier to get a job than if you were plopped down in Kentucky. There just might be more economic opportunity. I don't know if that's correct, but just to say that there are peripheries and there are centers to all places, and we know America. So I just use the American models of what is periphery and what is center to say, hey, wait a minute, even when, an immigrant from Morocco or Tunis or Iraq, if they were finally given a home, if it were in Dimona, in the middle of the Negev, they might have a lot less opportunity than if it were in Haifa or Tel Aviv, where there was a lot of economic opportunity, even in those kind of relatively poor years of the 50s, and say truly poor, the 50s of the state of Israel. All right, we have 20 minutes left. Let's pivot to story 2. If you could believe it, frankly, to me, this was not yet on the next screen, Ari, but I started with the softer story, and we can bring it down. We can get bigger, Ari. You can take off the Panthers Haggadah. Let's just bring all of us together again briefly, and then I'll have one other image to share. The other story I wanted to talk about was kind of rethinking, just as we rethought this story of the narrative of Ari Ben Canaan as played by Paul Newman. I want to talk about the story of Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel. So I'm not going to dip into, because we'd need another 6 hours, the post 67, the occupation of the West Bank. I just want to talk about what are some people call Arab Israelis, some people call Palestinian Israelis, some people call Israeli Palestinians, some people call Israeli Arabs. Let folks of this community choose the self-describing title they wish. And different polling is showing different things. I think more folks are embracing the title of Palestinian Israelis. So I'll use that. That seems to have become internally in that community the more popular way of kind of finding a name for itself. But we love that image, and it's unclear exactly where it came from. It seems to have probably not even come from a Jewish source. It seems to have come from evangelical British Christian sources. But this idea of a land without a people for a people without a land, this idea of the Jews being able to return to mandatory, first Ottoman Palestine and then British mandatory Palestine to Eretz Yisrael, because they are a people without a land. Namely, they're Jews living throughout Europe, throughout the Middle East, but they don't have their own homeland. And here's this place that doesn't, that is a land without a people. There's nobody who lives there. And obviously there were people who were living there. There's an indigenous Arab Palestinian population who are there. There's probably something like, 7, 8, 900,000 Arab Palestinian inhabitants in mandatory Palestine during the war, and I'm not going to litigate exactly how and why and to which cause the bulk of them left. But after the war in 48, roughly 700,000 of them flee across the borders, and you have about 150,000 plus minus 10, 20, 30,000. Let's not again litigate the exact details, but something like 150,000 Palestinian Israelis left behind who are made full citizens of the state. They live under military law until 66, and then that's kind of lifted about a year before the 67 war. And we all know, or maybe we don't, but we'll presume we know, Israel doesn't have a constitution, but it does have a founding document, which is most famously the Declaration of Independence. And I'm just going to read a clause from that I think highlights the best ideals of how folks should be stated. I'll read the full paragraph. There's the second half of it that I think is the key piece of this. The founders of the State of Israel say in their declaration, the State of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all of its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. And then it continues, it will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions, and it will be faithful to the principles of the Charter of the UN. So that's kind of the ideals when the state is founded in 48. Those are the ideals in the Declaration of Independence. Oh, look, how cool is that? I think Tybal brought up that clause from the Declaration of Independence of the State of Israel. So that's the ideals in the Declaration. And then I'm going to ask Ari, if you're still with us and not in your second Zoom that you're running, just an image. So there is President Reuven Rivlin, recently, I guess in the last year and a half or so, former president of the State of Israel. Just to remember, today is a good day to remember that. Israel is has a unicameral legislature, so it has a Knesset. The prime minister comes out of the Knesset and then becomes the executive, and then then becomes the head of government. And then there's a head of state who's much like the late Queen of England of blessed memory and the new king. They are, essentially, they're a head of state that's there mostly 99.9% for ceremonial purposes, but they do have to sign new laws into being, or they have to resign if they won't sign new laws into creation. And so I should have looked up when Bougie Herzog took over as president sometime, I don't know, a year and a half ago. For 10 years, Reuven Rivlin, former Likud member of Knesset for his entire career, but despite being from the right, I don't work for Temple Beth Am. Frankly, I don't need to worry about getting into trouble. But not like today's Likud, I'll say it, and not like today's Republican Party. A believer in democratic institutions. Reuven Rivlin was a beloved figure, kind of across the political spectrum, and beloved by, really cared about all of the state's citizens. And then in the 2010s, there was this effort to put forward essentially a new basic law. Israel, again, doesn't have a constitution. It's passed a series of basic laws that enshrine mostly rights for all kinds of people. In 2018, for the first time in the history of the state, Chok HaLa'um, a nation-state law, was passed that really took Israel instead in the opposite direction, and particularly vis-a-vis minority Arab citizens, minority Palestinian citizens. And I'll just read, it's a short two-page, give or take, law that's became a basic law. And I'll just read kind of two places where it really, really upset folks. The first was a clause in Basic Principles. It said, exercising the right to national self-determination in the state of Israel is unique to the Jewish people. So again, that was felt as really undercutting the rights of minority Palestinian citizens of the state. And then in Clause 4, it talked about language. It said the state's language is Hebrew. The Arabic language has a special status. Regulation of the use of Arabic in or with government institutions will be according to the law. Nothing is intended to harm the practical status of Arabic. But so both it kind of canonized at a higher level the rights of Jews to self-determination in the state of Israel, unique to the Jewish people, and that it also kind of I'm looking for the right word here. It lowered the power of the status of Arabic in state institutions from being an official state language to being a language with a special status. And it felt like a terrible thumb in the eye to Palestinian citizens of the state, descendants of those 150,000 folks who remained in 48. So another title those people are sometimes known as is 48ers, folks who had really begun over the last couple of decades to integrate into the state, getting better educations, certain professions really finding a home in them and feeling like they were once again, they were going back to pre-66. They were going back to, obviously they were still facing discrimination, but a new level of discrimination. And Rivlin, the reason I chose this image as our image to have on the screen, when this law was coming up for the votes, Reuven Rivlin famously said, that's his face there, and that's his signature below it. He said, I am the president of the state of Israel. I'm the president of all of its citizens. I must sign any law that's put in front of me or I have to resign. I'm not the king I'm a constitutional head of state. So I will sign it. But I will show my protest against the passage of this law by signing it in Arabic if you put this law in front of me. And I'll show that, again, this is a Likud, someone who spent his career in the right of center party. He said, if you put this in front of me, I'll sign it in Arabic. And so there's Rivlin. That's kind of that's his name there. And Reuven Rivlin Nasi Medina. You see, he signed it in Hebrew and then below it in Arabic to show his deep protest. So why I'm sharing this artifact is to once again kind of explode or reframe or question or productively complicate our telling of this very basic, back to the basic story of the state of Israel. We like to tell this story of a land without a people for a people without a land, and there was a people there. It's been a complicated story, but they've faced discrimination. They've worked to overcome that discrimination, and this was a real awful step in the wrong direction back in 2018. And I think what I'd like to offer, just as Reuven Abergil and the Israeli Black Panthers saying, wait a minute, we're going to use the story of the Haggadah and use our vote and use our right to protest as a way to push back against the discrimination we're facing and vote out a government that isn't treating us right and organize and build our own kindergartens as a way to push back against the discrimination we're facing. I think Rivlin was offering similarly by embracing the use of Arabic, by looking for opportunities to advance Arab citizens. Frankly, what this last government started to do in its year in office, and NIF, New Israel Fund, where I work, it was a big piece of our last year of work, was helping Palestinian Israelis, so Arab Israeli citizen organizations who are looking to and within the government to get more funding to their sector, more housing to be built, better schools to be built, hospitals to be put up closer to where they live in the periphery. There's a lot more funding made available and passed by this outgoing government. Electricity, water, yes, exactly, especially for I think a lot about Arab citizens in the north who tend to be better integrated, but especially for Bedouin citizens in the south, water and electricity it's as simple as that. A lot of Bedouin citizens live in what are called unrecognized villages. We've gone back and forth with the state to say whether they're allowed to live on the land they've lived on. And simply fighting, and they had a tremendous victory. And again, New Israel Fund was instrumental in this, making sure that bus stops are put up near these villages. These are often the poorest citizens. They don't own cars of their own. They need to take a public bus to get to a job, to bring home food for their families, and simply making sure that a bus stop is put outside of their village. Those who have been to the Negev in the summer know how beastly and how horribly hot it can be. If you just simply have to walk out of your village and get on an air-conditioned bus, okay, you can get a ride to a job somewhere else. But if you have to leave your village and walk 3 or 4 miles down the highway to get to the next bus stop that's near a recognized city, it makes employment that much more difficult. So small measures to make the lives of those citizens better is really a critical way of pushing back against this nation state law that was passed in 2018. So we have 7 minutes left. I'm kind of going to open it back up to questions. I'll just simply say it's not easy to take a story we know really well, to take a story we could be woken up at 3 a.m. and tell perfectly, and to say, wait a minute, this story is more complicated than the way I've always wanted to tell it. But I think it's critical as folks who I'm sure if you're listening to this or if you're here, you're somebody who cares deeply about the state of Israel, even though you're an American, a Jewish American or an American Jew. Whichever way you like to identify, you care very deeply about your relationship as an American, as a Jew, with the state of Israel. And hearing that story complicated is hard, but it also can be instructive in how we can work not only to make the safe more safe from external enemies, but also more just, more equitable, more shared, more kind, and frankly make sure it has a sunnier future than it otherwise would have. So that's why I wanted to complicate the story, and I hope it was helpful. Now we only have 6 minutes, but if Jackie or Tybal has any questions they'd like to ask, here I am. Ari, you too, you're welcome to ask questions.
Looks like Tybal has her hand raised.
I'm not shocked. What can I say?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's that firstborn thing. So I did wait to see for Jackie and Ari, but I thought if it's okay, maybe I would lead back to the Pittsburgh, because in a way, this analogy, American analogy, works for me when one thinks about minorities, and there's such a complicated set of minorities in Israel, all sorts of ways. But it's like, for me, what it was like being the only family on the street that didn't put out luminaria. And I'm not even going to explain what that is. And that was year after year, hate and hostility. But also in the public school, which of course closed for Good Friday, and the Pope got it wrong, so wouldn't for decades serve meat on Friday. For me, this has always felt like a very Christian country in a way that's uncomfortable. And to me, that's an analogy that does work if the thing that I had put up, because I had taught it, I don't remember how long ago, that if citizens are supposed to have equal rights, that means the majority has to have extra, I'm going to use a Jewish thing, extra rachmanas for the minorities. And I think, and we can see it now in political discourse, where once again, my Pittsburgh childhood is rearing its head, not Roman Catholics, but evangelicals and other things where minorities' rights are not being considered in the same way. Anyway, so the Pittsburgh open, the Pittsburgh close, and I think for me at least, understanding the difficulties, well, even though worse, because the basic rights, when I added the water and electricity, to me, things like that are just beyond appalling at this point. You know, it's not 1948, 1949 anymore. It's just horrifying.
Yeah, thanks, Tybal. I shouldn't confess this in front of Jackie, but I don't remember where it's settled upon that Ziegler is doing its Israel year this year. But back in my day, the Israel year was still at Machon Schechter, and I won't tell you which, but I had a class that was in the big library room, and I would sit in the back of the room. We're at CY mostly, at the conservative yeshiva, Jackie says. So I was at my rabbinical school year was at Machon Schechter, and I would sit in the back of the classroom. It was a very boring class, and there were old bound issues of various journals, and I pulled one off the wall one year, and it was a 1949, 50, 51, like first couple of years. It was a journalist's long account of a trip they were taken to the kind of Israel in its first years, and they were just talking about just how deeply, Tybal brought up this idea of water and electricity. They were talking about taking a bus. The image from that article that stuck with me was standing on a bus, this journalist, in Tel Aviv, and there was a immaculately dressed, must have been a Holocaust survivor, German Jew next to them, who was in a tailored suit and was holding wrapped in newspaper a carp. And the journalist had chatted with them and said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm coming back from work, and we haven't had animal protein in quite a while. And there was a seller who was selling carp. So I bought it, and here I'm running home to my family because we'll have carp for dinner tonight. That was just an image of kind of the deprivation of those early years. No one, or the kibbutzim had a little more, but basically there was very little to go around. And then as the state became wealthier, there was more. But yes, there are still, again, to reinforce what Tybal had said, there are the minorities are complicated. The story of East Jerusalem Palestinians is not the same as Galilee Palestinians, is not the same as those who live in the Triangle, is not the same as Ethiopian immigrants to the state, or Russian immigrants, or Bedouins who live in the Negev. And I think the fact that there's still not water lines running to where those folks are living is just a terrible injustice, and one we can push back on as where we decide to frankly put our charitable dollars in Israel is not with those who are trying to turn the Negev into Jewish-only paradise, but who are trying to make it a more equitable and just distribution of resources there. So be thoughtful philanthropists. Jackie had a question about how we can learn more about multiple narratives. I mean, frankly, I think the best book that has come out that'll tell us a more complicated story is my boss's book. Daniel Sokach, my boss at NIF, our CEO, wrote a book a year or two ago, which is coming out in paperback now. It was only in hardback for the last year, and now I think any day now the paperback is coming out. It's called Can We Talk About Israel? And it does a really good job of telling a complex but loving story of the state of Israel. So a 2.0 to my 1.0 class. And read stuff that comes from us at NIF. I think you'll get a similarly dedicated and invested and complicated story of a relationship with Israel.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.